We're here to scare everybody about why is John Michael on twice.
Camping out with Gene.
Doing things in the valley. Excuse me. Welcome, Justin. You're on mute.
I said, well, this is interesting. You guys in the same room.
Hey,
Hi, everybody.
hey.
What's happening?
We are live on YouTube and recording, so just FYI.
Good afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world.
Exactly. Is it morning anywhere?
I'm sure it's morning somewhere.
Somewhere.
I think East Asia, maybe.
Yeah. It's the Topo Chico crew. No, we're not being sponsored.
We're not drinking Corona yet.
Yeah. Looks like we have Bill.
We do.
Welcome, Bill.
Yeah. New Zealand confirmed it's still morning there by 1 minute, so
There we go.
count it.
That's why I was saying it wasn't that early. I mean, Shani has already said good morning, right? Let's wait another minute or two for Bram. So yeah, John Michael was down here in the valley for various reasons, so we figured we'd do this on one fiber optic link and make sure everybody could actually hear us. But easier than coordinating the live stream is letting John Michael do the couple slides that we're going to throw up. Wait another minute or two here for everybody to get in.
I think Bram raised his hand.
Oh, did he not get in correctly? Let me see. Participants. Aha. He's been here all along.
I see a couple of really good questions from the user Zach. If you could do me a favor and resubmit those as several different questions so we can answer them independently.
We can just do it all in one. We'll just leave it
Okay.
all. Let's just leave it all. He already did me a
Okay.
favor of bringing it over from chat.
Okay,
So it's not
cool.
like make him do another.
I didn't realize that. My
Thanks, Zach.
apologies.
No worries. Waiting on Bram's account to be a panelist. And we'll get underway. Pardon the minor technical issues. I think it's the modern TV of, you know, hey, wait, is this thing on? Is this live stream working? There we go. And now Bram is connected. Excellent. Okay, everybody. It is now 5:02 p.m. Pacific time on the 15th of June. John Michael is here with me, though he'll also be presenting on the other account there. Bram is now on after some technical difficulties getting in. And we have Bill and Justin here as well. So today's topic is going to be faster plotting, things like replotting attacks. How do we think about them? What do you care about your K32s? We would like to keep it on topic for security and security related, especially around plotting and proof of space and time. So questions about, for example, pooling will probably not be answered. With that, Bram, do you want to say a couple introductory words, and then we'll hand it over to John Michael to kind of walk through the overall talking points, and then we'll start getting questions.
Yeah. So there are a bunch of trade-offs
that were made in the design of plots, or well, not just plots, but how they're used on the blockchain and stuff, having to do with what the minimum K size is and what the filter size is. And whether these are set to appropriate values have to do with a lot of just empirical questions, which we did spreadsheet beforehand. We have some new information. It's not that different from what we spreadsheeted beforehand, but it's interesting. So.
Yep. So with that, let's go ahead and throw up a couple things to talk through. John Michael?
All right. Oh. It's going to make me restart Zoom real quick.
Oh, no.
At a high level point is we have some faster and easier to use plotters now, and that's a good thing.
Yep. Also, it's really important to know that we both expected that there'd be better plotters. The core Chia plotter has two things that are important. There are some more design details that we care about around cross-platform portability. If you're only targeting one or two platforms, there are some decisions you can make that are harder for us to make in the generic one. Now, what we've always expected to have happen is to actually head towards having three plotters. There'll be kind of the memory-centric plotter, the HDD-centric plotter, and the SSD-centric plotter, and trade-offs between them. And so, we're excited about the fact that plotting is going to be easier, especially because it's about time for folks to replot. With that, I'll turn it over to storage. John Michael.
Hey guys. So, as somebody who's been around since the alpha and played with almost every single plotting feature since that time, plotting used to be about 6 times more resource intensive in the amount of data it wrote to, during the plotting algorithm. It still writes about 1.3 terabytes of data. So the improvements that came in 1.04, were so above and beyond what it used to be in the earlier days. And now when we talked about speed ups and plot ups in the beginning, it was less about like what could be done parallelizing the plotting algorithm. It's more about the algorithmic improvements and the resource utilization profile of the different plotting available. And so one of the things we've seen, it's weird, we actually did a contest early on, and I think Bram mentioned that actually when we did the original contest for trying to speed up the plotter, we actually didn't get anybody engaged that were contributing to the code to try to come up with a new, faster plotter. But it's not surprising. Chia has grown tremendously in the last 3 months, and we have a ton of new people in the ring, and we have a lot of people that are really interested in doing Chia plotting development. And so just even recently over the last month, we've seen a couple different plotters that are taking different approaches. The first one is just parallelizing many more aspects of the plotting code that weren't parallelizable before. So before phase 1 was multi-threaded, but that was really the only part of the plotting process that was multi-threaded. And so to get maximum CPU utilization on the plotting, you actually had to do things like staggering, and you had to go very parallel with a large amount of temporary storage space. So
and let me pause you there. One of the things we did do is the reason that phase 1 is parallelized is that Bill and I did a lot of research with the RAM WJB branch, which you can still see in the Chia repository, to get a sense of what the limiting factor was when you could throw nearly unlimited money at plotting. And so a lot of what drove the K32 size decision was actually doing this kind of parallel type of plotting, but only on phase 1. The other phases are a bit more complicated, and it was going to take a lot more time for us to kind of get to that. So we focused on choosing a K and then getting back to launching a blockchain. Go ahead.
Right, yeah, we were running on extremely large AWS instances in that case. 96 cores and 384 gigs of RAM.
Yeah, and we assume they were running at about half the speed they should otherwise run because they're in VMs. So.
Yeah, and the fact that some of these new plotters are actually indeed writing, and I measured this on some of the, I've just played around with them on my development systems, and I've installed some of the new plotters and ran the code, and most of them are writing around the same amount of data. So that tells me that the actual amount of sorting and writes to disk, most of the time spent in the Chia plotting after phase 1 is doing sort on disk. And so that's one of the key things that were a place to look to start speeding up the process. So one is, for systems that were already very optimized and had a lot of temporary storage space, and people had system outputs that had kind of 256 gigabytes, which was the temporary storage space required per core, and scaled that up and the amount of DRAM adequate per system, they're not seeing major changes to the total terabyte per day output on these systems. Now, what these systems do, which is very welcome to the community, is actually increases on systems that didn't have balanced resource utilization. And that's a lot of systems, because it was very, very hard to get exactly the right amount of compute, storage, and DRAM on these systems for plotting. This allows you to take advantage of multi-core systems without either a large capacity SSD. Now, reminding you, you still do the same amount of writes, so high TBW SSD is still very much required, and those are not found generally on small capacity SSDs unless you're using something like storage class memory. I give some examples of the Intel Optane in the plotting spreadsheet that will kind of show up here in a few seconds. We actually got a lot of good results here from the community over the last couple of weeks in some of the new plotters. So for one, multi-threading is very good. So now you can have a different profile. Some people are finding out that if you get over 100 gigabytes of DDR4, you can make a small temporary RAM drive for TempFS, and you can use that to kind of suck up a lot of the writes. This actually helps with a lot of the saving on the writes to get better cost utilization for making plots. So these are all amazingly good things, and we totally support them. One of the ones that everybody's been talking about is this MadMax plotter. So I played with it myself. I did a YouTube on my personal YouTube, kind of looking at some of the results, and we have some results from the community up on the spreadsheet, and we'll send everybody a link, but it's on the reference plotting hardware spreadsheet that is part of the standard Chia wiki. But now we have a bunch of data collected from a bunch of different systems to see how this thing scales. So for one, it definitely allows you to take advantage of different system types, which will help reduce plotting costs and improve plotting efficiency for many people. We don't think that this is some massive algorithmic improvement. It's just parallelizing a lot of the things that we thought was kind of low-hanging fruit. We're happy that it's been done. That's the first part.
Yep.
The second question we've been seeing in the chat quite a bit, and we'll talk a little bit more about exactly kind of what the numbers mean and where do we baseline things. Obviously, the single plot time is the one that's changed the most. Prior to the MadMax plotter, I on a Rocket Lake system with the Optane, I had about, I think, 9,400 seconds for a total plot completion time. Which again, that was just with the stock Chia POS plotter, and so now we're seeing times, kind of sub 1,000 seconds. There's people have been massively posting this video to us of this Oak Ridge supercomputer doing a parallel plot in phase 1 in 25 seconds and the total plot in 64 seconds. I did have a chance to ping MadMax on Discord the other day, and was chatting with him a little bit about this to see, for one, do we think his code scales like this? 2, is it really massively parallelizable? 3, is it real? And the jury's still out on that. I can't make a comment of is it real or not, but it appears the output may seem like it could be in the realm of possibility, as we've seen pretty massive reductions in times. On the spreadsheet, you'll see as far as like somebody who has a system that I know and trust, and I can validate the results. I do have a friend that has done a phase 1 in about 300 seconds, and the total plot time, I believe, about 700 seconds. So yes, the code is scaling very well for single core time. Now, this is definitely a different way of thinking about the plotting problem, because you don't have to think about it as much as a power loss previously would have taken down however many plots you were doing in parallel and had to restart because there was no pause and resume. So this is, now if you're doing one at a time, this is much better in that regard. It'll definitely change some of the tools in the community like Plotman and Swar and some other resources, and we're going to be working with those to integrate to help make the plotting easier for a lot of people. And the question we've been getting, the number one question in the chat, on YouTube, on all of Keybase is, will we be changing K equals 32 anytime soon? And hopefully we'll walk you through some math that we've went through just in kind of how we think about this. And Gene mentioned, how we chose K equals 32 as the minimum size for the network had to do with some forward-looking projections on what we think people could achieve, at what cost, at what system utilization. So we'll kind of go in and describe some of the systems we think that can do this in a small amount of time, and whether or not that's actually a problem for the network. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So why are people worried about this? So in the consensus paper, there's something called a replotting attack. And this is really not so much of an attack as it's trying to game the system. You're trying to turn Chia, proof of space and time, into proof of work by saying, okay, if I get a challenge, I can basically try to compute a valid proof in the response to that challenge, which is today is about 30 seconds. It's about 3 signage points. So this attacker has the advantage of the plot filter. So what the plot filter does is basically when a challenge comes in, for a plot to basically do the lookups, it has to pass the plot filter, which is a hash of the plot filter, I believe the plot ID and the signage pointer. Yeah. And if the result of that hash has a certain amount of zeros, it passes the filter, and then it can go in and you can do the reads on the disk to see if you have a valid proof. So the plot filter is very good because this significantly cuts down the amount of I/O you do in actual real farming and harvesting by a factor of 512. That's what it is set at today. Now, this filter works the opposite way for somebody trying to do this attack because they can read, they can figure out what the challenge is, they can figure out what the filter is during that for every single signage point, and they can try to calculate one hash that basically proves for the 3 signage points within that sub 30 seconds. So okay, this is a good advantage for this attack, but we'll see why we don't think this is still economical for many different reasons. But so just because you can produce a phase 1 under 30 seconds, this does not mean you automatically win. We saw some people that were probably a little bit confused about this, that they just said, okay, if you somehow magically do a phase 1 under 30 seconds, you instantly win every single challenge. That's not true. It's still, the way to think about this is basically you're like kind of trying to pretend like you have a certain amount of space because you're basically trying to calculate the plot in real time as it comes in. Now, it turns out storing data on disk is very inexpensive and it's very efficient. That's part of how proof of space and time was developed, is that this is the way that it's securing the blockchain, in that these plots just sit on the hard drive, and when you're harvesting, you just read them when the challenges come in, and this filter reduces that by a large factor. So when you're trying to do this in real time, it becomes a very challenging problem. So one is that without massive changes to the actual k equals 32 or the way that we have constructed the proof of space today, this still consumes a lot of time. One is compute, is write bandwidth, and memory. So when you're compressing that into a very small window, your amount of data you're writing goes up exponentially. And this becomes a very hard memory bandwidth problem, becomes a very hard disk problem. You need a lot of temporary storage space. So k equals 32, today you need 256 gigabytes of temporary storage space. That was one of the reasons why k equals 32 was chosen and not a lower k value. And that was a big, and people that were on the testnet may remember this, because there was a time when k equals 31 was kind of on the cusp. But getting that amount of DRAM to fit a k equals 32 in memory was much more obtainable than it is for k equals 32. Okay, so say for instance you do have I think what we're thinking about is, a lot of people are asking the question is like, can this be done on a GPU? I think MadMax himself in the comments on the GitHub say something along the lines of like, I've done some coding on OpenGL in the past, OpenCL in the past, and porting things to GPUs. So it's a question of, do we believe this can be ported to a GPU? Will it be hard? Probably. Will it be done someday? If there's a financial incentive, most likely. And so the only problem is if a very low-cost consumer-grade piece of hardware can do this in under 30 seconds, this at least opens the window where we have to start looking at the knobs we have to tune. The knobs that we have are the K size, and the other knob that we have is the filter value. And we'll kind of walk through in a few examples of like what those do and where the financial incentive would be. But it wouldn't be a problem if, just because some person can do this on a supercomputer does not mean that the network is at risk, does not mean that they can financially attack the network in some meaningful way. And the other thing is, the only real problem is if very low cost consumer grade hardware can do this, then we actually aren't just totally hosed. There are a bunch of knobs in the protocol that we can tune.
Yeah, and I think it's important to know that part of the reason why we chose K32 is that it became very clear to us that total memory throughput was going to be the actual ultimate limiter on how fast you could parallelize a plot. So, if you have the ability to borrow a $150 million supercomputer that's designed to be massively parallel and otherwise is supposed to be modeling nuclear bomb explosions, you'll get under 30 seconds. But it's $150 million, and make sure Uncle Sam is aware that you're using it, please. What that does mean, and I'll read a quick question from Colin Williams, which actually hits on this perfectly, I think. I ran some calculations that suggested Chia's bottleneck for what I refer to as real-time plotting. I'll just change what he was saying. We're limited in practicality by RAM bandwidth and upfront cost, with even future DDR5 and HBM3 not fast enough to be practical. Is there other hardware limiters aside from throughput bandwidth you foresee? And I think the answer to that is generally no. I mean, it is RAM time to GPU, right?
Yeah, and the fact that is like, how well does this code port to a GPU? Even if there's slight inefficiencies, like the small time window that you have to make this attack profitable. So there was some other nonsense we heard on Reddit, and not to. A lot of people are really thinking about this and trying to learn, which I am very excited that people are actually trying to dig way deeper into the protocol. But basically saying that, okay, if this can be done in a GPU, was the whole thing just broken? And that, the financial incentive shouldn't be enough. Well, that's part of what this has been. This attack vector, and we call it an attack vector, but it's more of like just trying to exploit the system. Has been aware in the protocol since the new consensus. It was in the document, so it wasn't like there's deliberate trade-offs that were meant to make this not profitable. So it's not like that it can't be done. The trade-offs are meant to make it not economical by a very, very large margin. And we'll show you just some very quick spreadsheet math that I did that basically proved that is the case.
Yeah, and it's important. Like this morning, IDC was out with a report that in fact, Bram was really right, and there's a lot of stranded storage. And so fundamentally, you're talking about taking bleeding edge hardware, which is not going to be cheap, and you basically are emulating 50 terabytes. So you're not necessarily getting a speed up from that. And 50 terabytes is going to be competing with people who have 50 terabytes that they own for free and are otherwise spending it. Plus, the cost of storage is going to continue to go down over the next few years. So there's two kind of pieces that factor in. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people get stuck on revenue and not profitability. You can absolutely choose to unprofitably try to emulate storage, but even if you're an attacker, you kind of want to have the most leverage per dollar per attack, and that answer is generally storage.
Yeah, it's worth reiterating that this is very, very apples to apples here. That if you do a grinding attack on plotting, all that you're succeeding in doing is having the exact same share of the network as if you had a certain amount of space. There's literally no extra benefit to you whatsoever. So you're always making that decision about which of these two things do you have, and is this profitable for you to do?
And related to that, someone asked, is 2 terabyte per second memory bandwidth fast enough for real-time plotting?
Let me maybe go to the next slide, but and then I can kind of go through some of that. But before I leave this slide, the words that are in green are, the entire Chia company was founded on the assumption that proof of space and time is going to be more energy efficient than proof of work. And we all believe in that very, very strongly. We're not going to let something happen to compromise that as far as the protocol. So do not worry. We're not going to, as a company, we're not going to let that happen.
Yeah. There are knobs we can turn.
Okay. Zoom is blocking me here. Okay. So as far as, some of the math we went through here, I'm not going to bore you with the spreadsheet. We do want to spend some time answering questions, but just to know, the way to think about this is if you have a K equals 32, which is 101.3 GIB, and you have the plot filter at 512, you can basically look at the phase one time, and then you can look at what the attacks per signage point is, and then you basically have about 3 signage points to respond to the challenge. So the attacker, in this case, does get a factor of 3, and plus the filter in the attacks per signage point. So this is a benefit to this vector of attack. But you'll see one of the things about GPUs is, or any type of system that is able to pull this off, is that's a large amount of power consumed. And so in farming, the actual CapEx, or we call this capital expenditures in my world, but really you guys just call it cost, of like how much money does it cost to buy the hard drives. That is the majority of cost in Chia farming. Many of you know this very, very intimately. If you are a Chia farmer, you know this very well, that the cost of the hard drives itself is the majority of cost, and the actual power or operational expenditures to run that is a much lower cost. So in larger scale data centers, it might be 10 to 20%. In hyperscale data centers, it's actually less than 10% for storage. They are very, very efficient. Now, in proof of work, it's the exact opposite. Most of the money is actually spent on the operational expenditures for the power of actually running the equipment, and less of the money is spent on the actual capex of the hardware itself to use. Now, it's probably they're both high, but it's a much different ratio versus farming. So this is a very, very important thing in this attack, because you have to model what the power of the system would be. You have to model the cost of it. And then I've modeled just my bandwidth of what I think you need as far as to hit a certain number of seconds to complete a plot for phase one. Now, why is it phase one and not the whole plot? Well, hypothetically, somebody can write out phase one and try to farm off of it. Now, we don't believe that anybody has done this, we don't believe that we've seen any software that can do this today. It does become more challenging because you can't use the standard software that is already written to basically do the harvesting and farming. Okay, so for example, we'll just start here because this is the one everybody's been trying to talk about. So if I were to buy this supercomputer for $100 million and it runs at 9 megawatts, I just did this back of the napkin math, and they said they have 4,608 nodes, which is a very interesting number for us. But that is actually the number of nodes in this Oak Ridge supercomputer. And then they have a certain amount of GPUs per system. And I just said, okay, what's the total power of the system? 9 megawatts is kind of what I came up with at the back of the napkin. It doesn't really matter. This is just directionally kind of fun. So if we were to normalize it, and this is the metric of goodness here, which is like the total cost of ownership, which is how much money you're spending on basically farming Chia. And you divide that by the total amount of terabytes you have, and then you try to look at that over a time frame. So most people that are buying hard drives for farming are actually buying those in the intention of farming them for many years. If you're not doing this, then you're not getting the full value out of the plots you made. That is really the legitimate way you should be doing farming in Chia, is that the plot generation is a one-time thing. You can farm off them for many years. And so you can see here, it would be very silly to perform this attack, even though it can complete a phase one in 25 seconds. That system could emulate 57 terabytes. Okay, that would be a very poor use of a $100 million supercomputer. Now, it's probably a lot more than that, but that's kind of my baseline. Now, the fastest phase one we have measured today, I'm sure we'll get some faster systems here in the next week. This MadMax thing's only been out for a few weeks. My friend at Intel actually measured this on an ASIC system with one of the Optane SSDs. He's measured, I believe, a 309 second, maybe actually lower as of like the last 10 minutes if he's watching here. And so that very fast system, though, which would be, I don't say, somewhere between $5,000 and $9,000 for that system, could emulate about 4.6 terabytes of storage, and that would cost about $45 per terabyte per month. Again, if you're trying to perform this attack on any system today, would be not a very fun time. Now, the way that we're thinking about this is, at Intel, I spent a lot of time. I was designing the SSD controllers and the SSDs for PCI Express. So I know a lot about PCI Express bandwidth. PCI Express Gen 4 is 16 gigatransfers per second, and then you multiply that by the number of lanes to look at the total bandwidth. PCIe is bidirectional. If you were trying to perform this on a GPU or any type of system, you actually need memory bandwidth and PCI Express I/O bandwidth, because you have to move data around either from data which you're processing on the temporary storage that you're using to calculate the plot, or in memory, in DRAM. And so today, if you're doing DMAs or memory access for a PCI Express device, you have to do this over the PCI Express bus, and you're limited by the actual physical number of lanes times the speed of those. And so we said, if, for instance, a PCIe Gen 4 GPU that is out today, a very high-end card, maybe a 3090, whatever it is, $1,000 card, if somebody was able to perform this and get to a phase one time of 30 seconds, again, they could spoof 47 terabytes of storage. And again, that would only, even at $3,000, they'd be spending $858 per year to keep that powered on. And the total cost of ownership would be $2.56 per terabyte per month. So that is about 10 times more than, so one, the question is, if somebody can pull this off on a GPU and get the phase one time below 30 seconds, if that is possible, which, in the next 2 years, maybe we see somebody that comes across and does this, it would still be about 10 times more than the current farmers are paying for the storage. So we don't believe that anybody would try to go purchase dedicated hardware to do this, because it would be vastly unprofitable versus spending that money on hard drives to actually do the farming. So Gene said something very important earlier, which was Bram's hypothesis was that there is a lot of underutilized storage out there in the world. You may have heard the word over-provisioned. There's people that already have hard drive space, and they're going to utilize that for Chia farming. So the marginal cost for them of doing farming may be actually zero. So you're competing with a lot of people that already have this storage space and are utilizing it as an underutilized resource. And so it's hard to calculate the cost of that. So instead of doing that, I've actually just calculated, if you were to go buy this storage new, what it would cost to do farming. And so if you were to just say this first couple of lines are just hard drive only, like not including anything else in the calculation. These next ones actually include like things you would need to actually farm, like cables and a JBOD and other things in that calculation. And then this last one is farming and plotting. So it's not necessarily just fair just to say, oh, you're just going to spend money on farming hardware, because people actually have to spend money on plotting hardware as well, and then you amortize that over the equipment over the amount of time you plan on farming. And you can see, most of these farmers, if on the low end, are able to get to about 27 cents per terabyte per month. Now that's very good. If you're a farmer and you're getting to this 27 cents to 42 cents, most of the farmers probably sit in this range, and the ones that are coming in by new dedicated hardware today are probably towards this higher end of the range at 60 cents. And it would take a PCIe Gen 5 as GPU running with 256 gigabytes of DDR5. And by the way, I'm working with other experts in this space to see, we're doing some pathfinding on this GPU plotting to see, one, if it has legs, and two, what the theoretical bandwidth would be. But you would need PCIe Gen 5 to do a plot in 10 seconds, because the actual theoretical bandwidth is 58.6 GIB per second. PCIe Gen 5 by 16 is about 64 gigabytes per second on the by 16 link, bidirectional, so in each direction. So theoretically, if you had 256 gigabytes of DDR5 on the PCIe bus, on the CPU, and they were accessing that across that across the PCIe bus, or in the future, if you had something like Compute Express Link, where you had a cache coherent memory interconnect where you could actually access that DRAM directly from the GPU in peer-to-peer mode, you'd still need PCIe Gen 5 by 16 to get anywhere close to that bandwidth. And even then, if you can do a phase one in 10 seconds, you're still about 3x the cost of what the average farmer is going to be. So the point of going through all this math was just to say, okay, can this be done someday? We think most likely yes. Will it be profitable trying to compete with farmers doing this? No. Do we think that people are going to be actively trying to turn proof of space-time into proof of work? Most likely not.
Yeah, and it's important. People are talking about, I think it's the NVIDIA A100, which is this new, has 80 gigabytes on board.
Yeah.
The problem is that's great, but 80 gigabytes doesn't get you 1K32. And so, it's both the total memory that you have, the throughput to the memory you have, and that's kind of how you have to think about it. And, I saw another question fly by that I think's relevant. Somebody was like, well, will hyperscale data centers do this? And the answer is hyperscalers won't do it much. The guys below the hyperscalers are already doing it. So CoreWeave was on a Bloomberg podcast about 2 weekends ago talking about how they farmed Chia to offset the cost of their drives, and they haven't actually had to raise money because they've been able to use Chia farming to be able to build out their total drive size. What they do as a business is they do like last-minute rendering for Hollywood. And so at times they have to, take the Chia farm off and actually use those drives for their core business. But it's completely the right kind of answer for them to be able to have that over provision storage and then use it to do their real business, but when it's not doing the real business, to do farming. And in their case, they also do GPU, Ethernet, Ethereum mining too. Okay, so
yeah. So the last thing we forgot to mention in this is, if you wanted to, we'll make this available for anybody who wants to play with it, but you can see very easily if you go in here and change the plot filter, which again, this is one of the knobs we will have in the future. If somebody gets close to be able to perform this, we will make it very, very unprofitable to do it, because there is a way to change the plot filter, and it's not something we're going to discuss today, but you can just go in here and play with the math and see, has that giant multiple effect. So it's very detrimental to anybody trying to perform this attack if the filter gets changed. So one, if people go invest and try to make this happen, and then the plot filter changes, then they get screwed over pretty drastically right away. So
let's go ahead, Bram.
Yeah. So I'm sure people are going to have questions along the lines of, well, what if things change in the future? What if, as technology improves, the ratios between these numbers get way out of whack and we need to do something? Like what might we do? Two things that are the obvious things to do are to increase the minimum K above K32, or to decrease how aggressive the filter is. So right now, the K is high enough that it's kind of annoying. So like doubling it or something would increase a lot of annoyance to people quite a bit in the process of doing that. And would obviously invalidate people's plots, which would not be pleasant. However, for the filter, right now the filter is extremely aggressive. It's each plot once every signage point, once every roughly 10 seconds, has a 1 in 512 chance of needing to do a lookup. So less than once an hour per plot are you doing lookups. This is on the theory that this might be on an HD that's doing something else and you really don't want to distract it. But at the current level that it is, like multiplying that by 2 or even like 16, it would probably for most systems barely be material at all. So if we're going to change something, much more likely we're going to be making the filter a lot less aggressive than that we're going to be increasing the case size.
Yeah, and it's important to add that the filter is really about hard drives. If you think about the next 5 to 10 years, the switch to SSD, the SSDs kind of don't care. And so really the filter is almost, pointless when you move to an SSD world.
Yeah, if the filter were changed to like 1, to just grinding would be just no way, no how, never, clearly not.
Right. The filter is the leverage. And that's actually a question I wanted to answer that I saw. People were like, do you need to know about table 7? To be very clear, the way the plot filter works is it basically says, hey, the hash of the signage point, the challenge, and the plot ID needs to have 9 zeros in front. Looks a little bit like Bitcoin in that sense. It turns out that you can do enough hashes even on a modern computer that you could actually find probably 2, maybe 3 of the next signage points that you'd pass with that plot ID. So you can kind of jump them together. I think in reality, you probably only do 2 at a time. So it might even be that all these costs are double.
Well,
at
any given moment, there's going to be a few signage points that are active because you have a few signage points worth of time to get stuff into the time.
Yep. Let's see. Let's take some more questions. Let's talk about MadMax. A lot of questions about MadMax. Bram, is MadMax significantly less effective for the same K32? What's your take on that?
So the MadMax plotter, just in the interest of speed and also just implementation convenience, it's kind of new right now, occasionally drops some entries per table. I did some back of the envelope based on my own understanding of what he's doing, and figured that he's probably losing about 0.1% of all challenges. So if you have a MadMax plot, the rewards it's going to be getting are going to be 0.1% lower than a plot that was made by the reference implementation. Now, it will be a smaller plot, but by a much smaller amount than 0.1%. There's this thing where things that happen to get dropped, but from the first table get a factor of 64 reduction. It's a factor of 64 increase in the number of things that miss versus the amount of things that were dropped. My guess is the way these things usually work, when you have things that happen just kind of rarely, there's usually a way that's kind of annoying from an implementation standpoint of implementing it so that it detects that rare case and does something slower in that rare case and doesn't take a real performance hit. So my guess is probably it's possible to fix this without any real slowdowns in speed. But that said, I don't think the amount that's dropped is terribly material or concerning to most people, although it would be really nice if these things were byte for byte identical to what the reference implementation is producing.
Yep. And, some of our trusted farmers and others have been working with it. When you run plots check, Chia plots check at very high levels, you see a pretty good comparison for a MadMax plot. And, we've only seen people who've run really high numbers see a slight difference, and I would call it 1% or less in the total number of, successful plots that check on a MadMax plot. Yeah. So, I caveat that we're still looking at it and we've not been focused on it because we have this other little thing that I think the community wants us to get done first. But, I expect the MadMax plotter plots are good. And, we've already said that we expect to pull that in. There's some integration things we'll have to do to make sure it works right and can kind of, not blow up the Mac or other things. We want that stuff all to be right. But in due time, we expect that we'll be pulling that in. And as well, I think there are other optimizations. I've teased the team here that I think we're going to have a plotter config.yaml because there's going to be a lot of different kind of knobs and choices you're going to be able to make.
Yeah, there's a bunch of different things you want out of plotter. You want it to work everywhere. You want it to be super robust. You want it to, produce byte for byte identical outputs. You also want it to not use a lot of space while it's in the process of plotting, not have too much overhead there, which, when you've got plenty of space, it doesn't matter. When you don't, it matters a lot. So there's a bunch of dimensions in which, in some of them, the MadMax plotter is not yet as good as the reference one. So not yet ready for integration.
Yeah,
but
and that's where I think somebody asked a question on, like, are we integrating into the official Chia code? So one, the progress in the community right now is tremendous. I saw a spreadsheet on Discord that had a bunch of plotting time results. I have the one up on the official Chia reference hardware that people are putting in the results for the plotting times. So people are testing on a bunch of different systems. It seems like it's working and stable on a variety of different systems. The code's changing very fast. When I spoke to him on Discord, he mentioned that he was perfectly happy to work with us to get it in the code when it's robust and hardened and ready. When will that happen? Well, for the early adopters and people that want to start testing it, you can do it right now. You just pull down the GitHub and compile it. It's and there's a lot of tutorials already to go do that. So, yeah, our official stance is we're letting the community try to hash it out right now, and it seems to be doing a very good job of doing that.
I also want to add that if you are trying out all these third-party plotters, I mean, we haven't vetted them necessarily, but I mean, it is safe to use them if you're plotting to your public keys. You can have an isolated computer. Malware can't hide in plots. So if you can take those plots on isolated computer to the public keys, they're fine to test with.
There was one question, does the MadMax plotter not pass the plot filter as often? It's almost impossible for that to be the case. It should be that any plot, the way the plot filter works, it's going to pass the same amount. So that should be an anomaly if you see that. Let's see.
We don't yet have like the ideal diagnostics, because what you would really like to have for something that's dropping stuff is be able to take the reference implementation and make a plot, and then something that is not making byte for byte identical outputs, and have that make a plot as well, and then run the exact same challenges on both of them and see how many things are lost by this other thing. And that way, the just general noise in the number of responses that are happening is removed from the thing, and you just have noise in terms of how many things are dropped from the one that's not.
Actually, I think we do have a community member, Computer Whisperer, who's doing that exact thing, but it's just taking a lot of time to exhaustively search through all those challenges.
Yeah. One note, we're taking questions not necessarily from the chat on Zoom, but from the Q&A system. So please, if you've got a question, put it there, or on general in Chia Network Public on Keybase. Let's switch gears just a little bit. I am going to bring up one pooling topic, Bram. People are concerned that plot pooling will make it so that other forks or other chains can't use our plots. Can you tell us about what we've snuck in?
So we have a plan. So we most definitely want to support co-farming by other cryptocurrencies on our same proof of space format. We want our farmers to already be set up for everything else. I think our farmer community really, really wants that. We have definitely gotten some very, very clear messages from our community that they don't like replotting and they really want pools. So there's very, very clear messages we've gotten over and over again. For the current plot format that everyone's using right now, which gives a pool, that gives a pool public key, that will work. That's trivial to co-farm on other things. For our new format that allows you to port between pools, that's done by doing a puzzle hash. The problem with that one is that the singleton that's going to point to is going to be very specific to our blockchain. You're not going to have the exact same singleton on another blockchain. However, there is a thing that can be done here, which is basically everybody has a local key and a farmer key in all their plots kind of hidden away in the farmer key. So we're making it, we are tweaking the format of plots, not changing anything at the protocol level, but we're tweaking the format of plots that use a puzzle hash prior to launching of pools, so that it will be secure to say, here is the local key and farmer key that was used to make this plot key that's in this particular plot. In that way, something that's co-farming can just kind of treat the farmer key as basically a pool key. And so that you as a farmer can have some state on chain that's pointing towards the plot that your rewards are currently going to. That doesn't have quite the same elegance as the using a real puzzle hash as we're doing right now. However, it does work and works for everything without having to replot. There are a whole bunch of other more elegant things that could be done, but those would require that you replot every time you want to support another another cryptocurrency. And pretty clearly people don't want to do that. And the cryptocurrencies no other cryptocurrency supports it yet. So you can't, and we don't know which ones might. So you can't really prepare for that in the future. So it's the best solution that we can do is make it so that at a slight hit of elegance in other cryptocurrencies that want to switch to proofs of space and support proper pooling for everyone, you won't have to do any replotting. And so we have this new hook for doing that. We're rather tweaking an old hook that we have. What this does, the downside of this, and I want everyone to get a heads up on this, because this shouldn't cause pain for much of anybody, but people who have plotting utilities that they're maintaining really should be aware of this, that the format for plots that use puzzle hashes is very slightly tweaked. And we really don't want people using the old one after we get pooling protocol out, because although that will work, it means that if these people who have used it want to use another cryptocurrency that switches to proof of space in the future, they might have to replot those plots to get those rewards. So please, everybody who's maintaining plotting utilities, get this stuff in quick. We'll make links available to where our patch is that enables that in our stuff. And there might be a handful of people who are already using plot to puzzle hash. They either will have to replot that or farm off an old version of our software, which will work. For everybody else, good news, we're ready that once you do this replot, for supporting pools, then even if other cryptocurrencies decide to go ahead and switch to proofs of space, you'll be able to farm it no problem and have pool.
I just want to emphasize, Bram, that if you are self-pooling, like currently most people are, you don't have to change anything.
That's
still work.
Yeah,
right.
That's not being changed in the slightest.
Yep.
That's
So, Bram, how do we think about the transition to K33? Is there any advantage to replotting to K33 instead of K32?
The theory behind K33, there's sort of two benefits to it, both of which are a little bit silly. One of them is that if you really want to fill your space perfectly, because K33s are a little bit bigger, you can figure out the right ratio between like the right number of pairs of K32s to replace with K33s to like almost exactly fill up the available space on your media. So that's kind of cute. The other theoretical benefit is if like storage really gets fast in the future and you have like a zettabyte like regular spinning disk in the future. Now, most likely things will switch to SD by then. This is highly unlikely to happen. But if in principle, if you had spinning disk with some ludicrous space on it, then you would get completely killed by the number of lookups you have to do for it. And you might want to use much higher Ks to reduce the number of seeks that you have to do. That's looking highly unlikely at this point, but we wanted to make sure that we were ready for such theoretical things, because when you are making something that's supposed to run until the end of time, you have no idea what's going to happen.
Yep. A somewhat related question is, is it easy for these people making other plotters to do these changes that we're currently talking about? And, the quick answer is yes. These are just minor changes to how the keys are stored in the headers. And, we'll be documenting this very well. It's very easy to make these changes.
Request we have that they just have to pull in.
Yeah, if they've already forked from our code, it's just a simple merge back into their code.
Yep. Yeah. No, look, our goal is to try to make this as portable as possible, and we identified the portable pool plot issue as yikes. That makes co-farming difficult, and we really don't want that. We want, from an environmental impact perspective, to let other people who don't care as much about the consensus algorithms proof of to, be able to move to this and leverage, everyone here. But we also have to be careful, just because 51% attacks are a real issue that people have to think through about getting y'all farmers to adopt. So if not enough of you adopt, then all of a sudden some of our whales could, for example, take over other people's chains. So, we wanted to make sure that we've thought through all those issues so we could get people to onboard and move over. Let's see. I believe we're kind of catching up on these questions. Bram, a question that always kind of pops up and it's related. Can you talk about the quantum hardness of Chia and where, its vulnerabilities are and what we kind of think about those?
There's two places where there's real quantum attacks on Chia. Number one is in the BLS signatures, and number two is on the VDFs. It's important to emphasize for both of these are very, very theoretical. And they're kind of analogous to, you have also SecP signatures in Bitcoin are not quantum safe, or not super quantum safe, shall we say. It appears to be that quantum breaks in practical cryptography are looking a long ways off, if ever. The practicality of these is highly dubious. We are doing in our keygen for our public keys. We're doing some steps where there's like a winternet signature in there that's just hashed for the next step. So there is in case of crazy emergency, break glass option of making it so that basically all the signatures are invalidated and you just have to start revealing your private key, but not the private key behind that, and you use that to sign things. That's something you don't really want to do. There are other, however, when you have that, there's another cute thing that you can do, because there's a hashing step in there. If everything gets broken, you also have the potential to have, if there's some like post-quantum snark thing that you can do, you can have, you can generate a proof that you have the pre-image using this post-quantum snark that you're using, and use that to effectively sign something. Our VDFs are actually in much less danger than those, because you have an extremely short period of time to attack a VDF. It's gone in 10 minutes. So not much. That's much less worrisome, and it's not directly defending stuff in the same way. So much greater concern about the BLS signatures. Right now, the state of quantum resistant cryptography it's moving a lot. We don't know where it's going to go. Any quantum resistant cryptography you adopt today, is just going to be really bad in a couple of years. There are much better things that are going to be available in the future, because the state of the art has been improving a lot very fast. So we're kind of keeping an eye on it. I think it's pretty unlikely that such things will be necessary in my lifetime. And the not post-quantum things have a lot of benefits of getting like really trivial non-interactive signature aggregation and really nice small things and relatively small computational cost. So that's why we're using the ones that we are, which I believe is the right tools to use today.
So a couple things that are kind of floating in the community I just wanted to quickly respond to. People are asking, hey, can you use both types of plots in the future, the ones that you built already and the ones that assign to pools? The answer is yes, they'll co-farm in the same wallet. And the other question was, if I go to a pool, can I move back to self-farming? And the answer is absolutely yes. You actually could replot to self, and that's probably the first thing that'll be available shortly. But the whole point behind the portable pooling plot is any pool, including yourself.
Yeah, no. Our pooling protocol allows you to jump pools. It allows you to switch the parameters so that like pools can have different policies about the amount of time it takes to exit them. There can be pretty much, arbitrary things. Actually, it's actually paid a singleton, so you could make it so that like your rewards are going to a rate limited wallet if you set up per pool to begin with. That's getting pretty fancy. We're not putting that in the UX right up front, but actually we have this really amazing on-chain programming environment, and we are completely dogfooding it, and in fact leveraging it very, very well for pooling protocol, which is our first big project using it that we're actually deploying. We've built prototypes before, which is how we know how to actually do this stuff pretty well. But this is our first time really building something big and deployed.
Great. So, Bram, I think there is one question people are asking, which is, if we had to change the filter, would that be a fork?
Yes, but probably not a terribly contentious one. It wouldn't actually cause pain for much of anybody other than people having to upgrade their software.
Yeah. And it would also probably have a very long activation window. Let's see. Other questions.
I have a couple that I collated. People are asking about Chia plot check. Is there some warranty that can give to the MadMax plots? Like how can they validate the MadMax or any other third-party plots work, and we'll farm Chia for them?
We have our command line filter or a check. Yeah, what's it called? The
Chia plots check is what it's called.
Chia plots check. Yeah, we should probably put that in the GUI as well.
Yeah,
go
ahead, Bill.
I was going to say, yeah, you can run Chia plots check on the MadMax plots and see over a large number of iterations that they do perform. As far as we can tell, they do perform pretty well. Again, community members are designing tools that will do an exhaustive search through all the challenges in the plot file to see how they match up with the stock plotter. That's just part of the vetting process. It's going to take some time because obviously it takes a while to run that exhaustive look through the plot file. The main problem we have with the MadMax plots is that they're not byte for byte identical with the stock plotter. So it's taking us a while longer to validate it, but that doesn't mean that they can't still work. So.
There's a question floating around about whether BIP39 has an issue. If you would, please follow up later on Keybase with what you're pointing at. We're actually not implementing BIP39. We're actually implementing EIP 11 something. So we're actually using the Ethereum 2 standard for BLS signatures. And we have, was it?
Might be implementing an older version of it because we got it deployed.
We shipped before it was final. The one difference between the final and ours is that the opportunity to salt or password encrypt is not down in the key; it's up above in the application for us. So
probably
that happened after our plots were finalized during testnet, which is like about almost a year ago, and so that gives you an idea of how committed we are to keeping plots valid.
Right.
Another question they asked about if we could address the concerns that they've heard in the community about double farming on the mainnet and how that, if that applies, if there is any concern to that kind of an attack.
So our pool protocol is very specifically designed to not have problems with double farming. If you are trying to design a pool protocol where people can have already running plots, where they join your pool with these things that they've already plotted to self-pooling using the old format, which doesn't have a singleton that it's paying to on the blockchain, that inherently will have double farming in it. Those are going to be pretty crappy protocols. So I think it's a pretty high likelihood that basically everyone, including current pools, is going to try and switch to our new pooling protocol once it comes out, just because they have these like pretty gnarly inherent problems with using a fundamentally insecure approach to pooling.
Yeah, and it might be good to define these double farming. There's nobody that can spoof double the capacity and actually win any meaningful rewards on the actual network. This is trying to trick certain unofficial pools into thinking you have more space to get more pooling rewards for the pools that are unofficial today. So nobody can actually fake space on the actual real network. That's, as Bram said in his Twitter, that creating a false proof of space is not possible.
Yeah, you're not actually fooling the Chia blockchain, but you are stealing from other farmers within that pool.
Yeah. Also, you can fool your own UI. Your own UI is not aggro about trying to make sure that you have the right number of space. So if you take the same plot and you make 15 copies of it and it says you have 1,500 gigabyte plots, you don't. You have one.
Yeah, congratulations, you pulled the UI, but you're not going to be able to make a proof.
That's right. You'll make 15 proofs of the exact same proof.
Yeah,
Bill.
To clarify the nature of the attack, if you have a pull protocol that's based off of partials, which could be done today, I can't vouch for what the existing pools are actually doing. I'm not making any claims about what they're actually doing, but they could be checking partials, which aren't terribly fakeable. The thing that they can't really stop you from doing is just running your own farmer, pointing at the exact same as their client is, and then you might sometimes win, and your farmer is the one that makes the block rather than theirs. Looking at the exact same plots, so now you're getting credit for having these plots, but in the cases where you actually do succeed in making a block, you might just get to keep the block. They might kick you out of the pool for doing that, but you might have been small enough that it's an unlikely circumstance where you actually make a block anyway. Also, similar attacks where you have multiple pools and you just join all the pools and just get credit for your work in all the pools. So you're giving legitimate proofs of space to all of them. You're just kind of double dipping across all of it.
So Bill, a question. Could somebody try to use an FPGA or an ASIC with high-speed memory to somehow create phase one of a plot faster than a GPU?
Well, I mean, obviously, if NVIDIA wanted to design a system specifically for us, I mean, that could be a possibility, but we're talking about costs here as well. I mean, whether it can compete with hard drives, not likely for most cases.
Yeah, the other thing is the FPGAs and ASICs. So to get high bandwidth on an ASIC, you actually have to integrate a lot of memory channels, a lot of like in an SSD controller, more flash channels. That's actually consumes a large percentage of the actual area in the ASIC, which the area is directly proportional to the cost. So if you wanted to make some high bandwidth ASIC, it would also be high cost and high power. So these are all the trade-offs. Just with the plotting being so memory and IO intensive, not that it can't be done on an FPGA, but being done fast, you're still limited by the memory bandwidth, which may not be something that's going to be cost effective or easily obtainable. So
yeah, and it's doubtful an FPGA is going to be able to do this. It would be an ASIC if anything.
That's right. And Blake 3 and Chia 8, which are the kind of primitives that we use here, are just intentionally designed to be extremely efficient. So it's not clear that there's a huge step up from custom hardware from even the Chia stuff that's coming on the next generation of Intel processors on acceleration.
At some point, if someone's really trying to grind like super fast, like the costs of power are going to become dominant over the cost of their hardware, and there's just we can only get so far from the land hour limit. It's just going to cost you power to do that, and you're making a faster system is just going to be doubling the cost every time you double the speed because it's doing double.
Yeah, look, if you have a $1 billion budget, you too can create a petabyte, or you could just buy a petabyte for a lot less. In fact, you buy a lot more petabytes for $1 billion.
Or just buy a couple Oak Ridge supercomputers, right?
Right. 300 million later.
You do that today.
The old joke in quantum computation is there's all these papers whose title is 15 equals 3 times 5.
Yeah, and to be clear, we're not being dismissive. Part of my job involves talking to many of the storage vendors, so I'll be talking with some of the top technologists at many of these storage vendors about this exact problem, getting their take on it. Everything we've learned of today, points to this being a pretty challenging problem.
Yep. Okay, I think we've got most of the questions answered here. Obviously we'll be available online. The nice thing from our perspective is that we're aware. It's something we've thought about, and we have the knobs to turn if we have to make changes. But ultimately, proof of space and time is a well understood problem. There is no real magic way to stop it. To the extent that we cause people to cause memory buses to get a lot faster, not necessarily a bad thing. But if you wanted to spend a bunch of money not buying storage and instead trying to build an ASIC and do all of that, it's a big risk for somebody doing that, because with a simple change to the software, it would be invalidated. So, from that perspective, we don't worry about it too much. Thank you, everybody. I will say the only thing we'll say about pools is it's very soon. There's put in quite a bit of work. If you take a look in GitHub, you'll see that there's been a tremendous amount of activity on it, and we should be getting those things out to the pool operators very soon now. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.